I'm Ann Dark.
I'm Tracy Stormy.
And I'm Kathy Knight.
And together we are
It Was a Dark and Stormy Book Club,
a podcast for mystery lovers.
Welcome.
If you enjoy our show, please consider contributing to the Dark and Stormy Patreon. By becoming a patron, you will help us create better and quality content. There are also benefits to becoming a patron, such as exclusive content and Dark and Stormy merchandise. Become a supporter at patreon.com/darkandstormybc. Check our website for the link. We appreciate any and all contributions. Thank you.
Hello and welcome to It Was a Dark and Stormy Book Club. Today we cross the ocean and we visit the country of Slovakia with author Robert Bryndza.
Robert Bryndza is a crime writer
who has sold over 3 million copies and has been translated into 29 languages. He's British and lives in Slovakia with his husband Jan.
We're talking with him about the book Nine Elms, which is the first in his Kate Marshall series. Kate Marshall was a promising young police detective when she caught the notorious Nine Elms serial killer, but her greatest victory suddenly turned into a nightmare. Traumatized, betrayed, and publicly vilified for the shocking circumstances surrounding the cannibal murder case, Kate could only watch as her career ended in scandal. 15 years after those catastrophic events, Kate is still haunted by the unquiet ghosts of her troubled past. Now a lecturer at a small coastal English university, she finally has a chance to face them. A copycat killer has taken up the Nine Elms mantle, continuing the ghastly work of his idol. Enlisting her brilliant research assistant, Tristan Harper, Kate draws on her prodigious and long-neglected skills as an investigator to catch a new monster. Success promises redemption, but there's much more on the line. Kate was the original killer's intended fifth victim, and his successor means to finish the job.
We would like to welcome Robert Bryndza, who is the author of the book Nine Elms, to our podcast. Welcome, Robert.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Are any of the characters or events in Nine Elms based on actual people or events?
Well, it's not so much the characters in Nine Elms. It's more to do with the location, because the book is set in the south of the United Kingdom by the sea. Even though I've created the town where Kate Marshall, the lead character, lives is fictitious, but the whole area of Devon and the Dartmoor and quite a lonely, rugged area, that's real. And as a family, we used to go on holiday every year to Devon and Cornwall in the United Kingdom. And that really inspired this book, because I wanted to write about that rugged landscape and being by the sea and how different it feels to London. That was actually my starting point for it. The characters just seem to come out of the location, which has never happened to me before.
You did an excellent job portraying Kate and her PTSD. What did you do to prepare yourself for her character development?
Thank you. I did some reading about it, and I read about it before for a previous book, but I tried just to sort of keep that information at the back of my mind, because often I know that when I do research, I really find I try not to put all of my research on the page, because you've got to really carefully weave it into the story to make it sort of organic and believable. And I think sometimes if you do a lot of research, you do have to be very careful that you don't sort of regurgitate it all onto the page because it becomes a bit boring. So I let the character of Kate develop, because at the beginning of the book, she is, I don't want to give any spoilers away, but she's kind of okay. It's before the terrible thing happens to her. So I kind of had to develop her character first, and then imagine how this sort of catastrophic event would affect her character. So that's kind of the way I dealt with it. And I did keep a lot of things in mind about how PTSD affects people. Yeah, I think I let her character develop first, and I sort of worked out how she would crumble, if that makes sense.
Well, I have to tell you, after hearing her story and knowing what happened to her, I think I would have been a full alcoholic myself. Wow.
Yes, me too.
Well, the story is written from multiple points of view. Is this your typical writing style? And do you write each line or the point of view separately or as the story flows?
I always tend to write a first draft that's sort of got quite a basic outline of the story. Like, for example, in Nine Elms, there's two strands, there's two cases ongoing. I don't want to give too much away, obviously, but there's sort of the original case, and then there's another case sort of that's being investigated. And then the first draft was actually just one of the cases, and then I got to the end and I read it back again, and I realized that I needed another strand. Looking back at my books, I think I tend to work like that. I don't know if it's because, being male, not very good at multitasking and thinking about too many things at the same time. I tend to go back and I'll put another layer on and weave things in. I've done that on books in the past where there's two stories ongoing. I'll tend to write one and then I'll tend to write the other separately and then put them together.
Oh, wow. That has to be a lot of editing.
A lot of editing. I'm not really a planner. Well, I do have an idea of what I want to do and where I want to go, but I tend to just write and then I'll go back over it again and again and again, and it sort of comes out of that. Because I think that for me, especially when writing crime thrillers and crime fiction, very often I like it to be a surprise for me to know who did it, if that makes sense. I think if it's too carefully planned out, I've tried that before and it's not as interesting, so I kind of keep it spontaneous.
That's always a challenge for us to talk about mysteries because there is so much that we cannot say.
Yes.
After writing 6 in the Erika Foster series and 3 in the Coco Pinchard series, is it difficult to develop a new protagonist?
Yes, I always find writing a new book or a new story difficult. But I think having created 2 series and going back and doing it again, it becomes even more difficult because when I first started out writing, I suppose I was more courageous. And then the more readers you have and the more readers who want to know what you're doing next, I think you start to feel a responsibility. And I think I really felt that with this book. And it was very hard to go back and create something from scratch because you always forget just how much work it is. Also knowing that you're writing a character that's not just going to be in one book, but hopefully in more than one. I mean, I planned to write 3, so I kind of had that of this series, the Kate Marshall series. I sort of had that in my mind that she's got to be a good enough character, not just for one book, but for 3. And readers need to like her after the first one, because if they didn't, they wouldn't want to read any more books. So yeah, it did feel quite a lot of responsibility and hard work.
Your Coco Pinchard romantic comedy series were kind of lighthearted, and Erika Foster is quite gritty. What inspired you to go over to the dark side of writing?
I always wanted to write something dark. I mean, ever since I've been writing, I've liked to write different things. And I started off with the romantic comedies and I self-published those and was really lucky to have success with them. And it got to the point where I thought, well, if I don't try something different now, then I might get pigeonholed into writing just one thing. So that was one of the things that inspired me, was just to kind of do it and try it before the stakes got too high. And then in terms of the story of writing my first crime thriller, where we live in Slovakia, there's an exhibition centre that we often go to, and it's sort of a thing where you can walk around outside and you can see stuff. It's really cool. And there's this sort of this derelict area of this exhibition centre, and there's what used to be a restaurant built on a lake where you go inside the restaurant and go to the bottom, and half of the restaurant was underwater, and you could eat a meal looking out through a glass partition underwater. It was like dining under the water, dining with the fishes or whatever. And we stumbled upon this one day, derelict, and it was flooded. And I just had this idea that if you wanted to dispose of a dead body, it would be a really great place to do it, because Slovakia is frozen for half of the year. And I thought if you put the body in that flooded restaurant and it all froze over, the body could lie undiscovered for months on end. Whoever did it could escape. And that was sort of the thing that inspired me to write my first crime thriller.
That's really interesting. I guess we're not writers, so we could never think of such a thing.
My dark mind.
Erika Foster and Kate Marshall are both very complex characters with troubled pasts. Why did you choose to write them this way, and was it important for them to be women?
It was really important for them to be women because I think as a writer I find women much more interesting to write about. And I think certainly women who are working in positions of power as well, like with Erika Foster being a plainclothes detective in the UK police, now Kate Marshall, who is a private investigator. I just think it creates a huge amount of conflict because, as in real life, that obviously more women now are taking positions of power and management. I think there's still a huge struggle for women to be sort of taken seriously and to get to positions of power. And that just is a very interesting thing to write about, and it creates a lot of conflict and interest. I think that with them having troubled pasts as well, I just always always find people that are quite damaged interesting to write about. I don't mean damaged in a negative way. I mean sort of people that have been through something or have suffered something or have overcome a hurdle to get somewhere. I just think that whole mix of things is so interesting to write about.
I really enjoyed how you portrayed Kate in this. I liked her flaws. I liked how strong she was.
Thank you. Oh, I'm really pleased. Thank you.
Now, you alluded to the fact that the Kate Marshall series will have 3 books. Would you ever consider writing a prequel?
Oh, to the Kate Marshall series? Well, yeah, I think it could be very interesting because she...
Yeah.
At the beginning of the story, she is a police officer because the beginning of the story is set 15 years in the past. And even though she's a young police officer, I think she probably has been involved in a lot of interesting cases as a police officer. So, yeah, that would be a very interesting thing to look at and write a prequel.
Well, I enjoyed the character development you did in the whole book. My favorite character was Peter's mother.
Yes.
Yeah, she had to be fun to write.
Oh, yeah. I love writing sort of older lady characters because I think, again, it's like, I think most older women get to sort of to the point where they're always telling the truth and they, I think, are more confident and just, obviously, Enid is not a nice person at all. But I just thought having confidence of age and also all those foibles was fun to write. Yeah, it's always fun to write a really good villain, and those kind of villains that maybe people like just a little bit too much than they should as well. I think that's a very interesting thing because, I mean, she's a hideous person, but there's something enjoyable reading about her. I don't know what it is for me writing her.
She was so evil, she was funny. I read in your blog that you nearly gave up writing, but then after moving to Slovakia, a publisher there loved your book, Lost in Crazy Town. You said you couldn't even read the book. Do you now speak and read Slovakian?
Well, I can speak a lot more. I've been learning to speak Slovakian. I'm still not lucky enough to be able to read fiction in Slovakian, so I'd have to say no. No, I can't.
Does the publishing world in Slovakia differ greatly from American and British publishing?
It does in the technical sense that ebooks haven't really taken off to a great extent in Slovakia. It's still print and hardback-based books.
I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing.
No, it's not. Because my mother-in-law is Slovak and recently bought her an e-reader, and she actually loves the fact that she can, because she's now retired, and I think she's quite a voracious reader, so she's able to read more. Not that she lives far from a bookshop, but I just think she likes the ease of that. The one thing that's good is that in Slovakia, there's a little bit more value placed on a book in the sense that people are willing to pay a little bit more, and that's another good thing. I've been to so many countries, and the one thing that's really good is that all nations love reading. In every country, there's avid bookworms, and that's a really cool thing.
That's really great to hear. Do you have any new books coming up or events that you'd like our listeners to know about?
Well, Nine Elms is now out, so I would love it if you would consider buying a copy. It's available from Amazon. It's available in ebook, audiobook, and in print as well. And in terms of new books, I'm actually working on the second book now in the series, which is called Shadow Stands, and I hope that will be out at some point later next year. That's what I'm doing. I'm kind of finishing up doing the promotion now, and I'm really got to get my head down and finish writing the next book. So that's my plans for the next few months.
Can you share your website with our listeners so they know where to go to find out when those new books are coming out?
Sure. My website is www.robertbryndza.com.
Great. We'll put that in our show notes so they can find you easily.
When the new book comes out, definitely send it to us so we can be the first to read it. Second of all, share it with our listeners.
I will. Thank you.
Well, Robert, we thank you for taking time to talk with us. We loved Nine Elms. That was a very, very good read.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate that. And thank you for having me on the show, and really been great to talk to you. Thank you.
And we wish you all the best. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Have a good day.
You too. Bye.
Well, that was one of the best books that I've read in quite a while. Enjoyed that book a lot.
I would totally agree. Robert is a very talented writer, and I cannot wait to see what he does with this series. If you enjoy a good mystery and especially really good character development, then this book is definitely for you.
Agreed. Next, we have our up-and-coming books. The first is Snowball by Gregory Bastianelli. It's by Flame Tree Press, and it came out January January 16th. It's apparently a thriller horror book.
Next, we have The Blaze by Chad Dundas. It is published by Penguin Books. It's a standalone. It comes out today, January 21st.
The Third Rainbow Girl is by Emma Copley Eisenberg by Hatchet Press, and it came out today also. It is a true crime.
Check those out. Go to your library or go to your local bookstore